You know, when you dive into Christian end times theology, there's one question that seems to pop up more than any other. And the answer, well, depending on who you ask, it could mean the difference between a few rough days and 3.5 years of unimaginable persecution for believers. So let's get into it.
So there it is, the big question. When is the Great Tribulation actually begin? And listen, this isn't just some academic debate for theologians. The answer completely changes the game. It defines the final experience for believers on earth. We're talking about a massive difference in what they're expected to endure. The stakes are incredibly high.
Okay, so before we can even begin to answer that, we've got to make sure we're all speaking the same language. We need to define some key terms, because the source material lays out a very specific cast of characters and a sequence of events that are absolutely crucial to understanding this whole prophetic timeline.
First up, the last week. So this comes from a prophecy way back in the book of Daniel, and you should think of it as the final 7-year countdown clock for humanity. Pretty much everything we're about to talk about, it all goes down inside this 7-year window.
All right, every story needs a villain, right? Well, in this one, the main antagonist is a figure called the Son of Perdition. This is someone who rises to become a global leader, but then takes a dramatic turn, walking into a rebuilt temple, declaring that he's God, and kicking off a massive worldwide persecution of believers.
And that intense persecution, that's what's called the Great Tribulation. Our source is really clear on this. It's a period of suffering for believers that's unlike anything else in history. But, and this is a huge but, it's completely separate from what comes after it. The source draws a hard line between the tribulation and the 7 plagues, which are a judgment on non-believers.
Okay, now this is where it gets really fascinating. The entire debate, the whole reason there are 2 different views on when the tribulation starts, boils down to how you translate one little phrase in one single verse from the book of Daniel.
Here it is, Daniel 9:27. And the phrase that causes all the trouble is in the middle of the 7. Now, if you read it that way, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? It suggests the son of perdition does his thing, sits in the temple, stops the sacrifices, and starts the tribulation right at the 3.5-year mark, smack dab in the middle. But what if that's not what it means? So here's the fork in the road. Does the original Hebrew mean at the midpoint, like on a specific day? Or does it mean for the duration of the half? Wow. That one little change creates 2 completely different realities. One says the tribulation starts late. The other says it starts on day 1 of the final 7 years and rages for the entire first half.
Let's just break down how different these 2 timelines are in practice. In view 1, where it starts at the midpoint, believers might only have to endure this intense persecution for a handful of days before they're delivered. But in view 2, whoa, if it lasts for the duration of the half, believers are facing 42 months. That's 3.5 full years of this stuff before the first resurrection happens.
So which one is it? A few days or 42 months? Well, the source material we're analyzing doesn't sit on the fence. It makes a really strong case for that second view, that the Great Tribulation for believers starts on day 1 and lasts for the full 42 months.
And the logic here is actually pretty compelling. The source points out that other figures, called the 2 witnesses, are prophesying for that entire first half, the first 1,260 days. Well, that implies there's already an evil power for them to be prophesying against, right? Plus, why would the son of perdition go to all the trouble of enforcing a mark of the beast if believers were just going to be raptured a few days later? It doesn't really add up.
All right, so if we follow that line of reasoning, we can actually build a pretty detailed timeline. According to this source, we can map out exactly what the sequence of events looks like for believers during those final 7 years.
So here it is. Day 1, boom, the tribulation starts, and it lasts for 42 months. Then you see these other key dates from Daniel. But the big one, the one that matters most for believers, is day 1335. This is called the blessed day. It's the first resurrection, the moment believers are taken off the earth. And notice the timing. Only after they are safe do the 7 plagues of God's judgment start to fall on the world.
Yeah, that number, 1335, isn't just pulled out of thin air. It comes directly from Daniel chapter 12, verse 12, which says, "Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1335 days." In this view, that's it. That's the finish line. It's the exact moment the suffering ends for believers and their deliverance arrives.
You really have to get this distinction because it's the bedrock of this whole argument. The Great Tribulation is seen as a time of testing, a purification for believers, and it's carried out by the son of perdition. The 7 plagues, on the other hand, are God's direct punishment on those who followed him. So believers endure the first, but are rescued from the second.
Okay, but wait a second. If the timeline is a fixed 1,335 days, that brings up a really good question. How do we square that with that famous verse in the New Testament that promises God will cut the time short?
Here's the verse everyone thinks of, Matthew 24:22, "For the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." I mean, that sounds like a flat-out contradiction, doesn't it? How can a period of time be fixed and shortened? Well, the source offers a pretty clever explanation.
So here's how they solve the puzzle. It's not about chopping days off the 42 months. It's about perspective. The total period of final judgment includes both the tribulation and the even more severe 7 plagues. Believers have to go through part 1, the tribulation. But then they get pulled out, the first resurrection, right before part 2 begins. Their suffering is shortened because they get to skip the final, most terrible phase of judgment.
So, in the end, what's the big takeaway from all this? The source suggests that while the start date is a fascinating debate, the real focus for believers should be the guaranteed endpoint. The hope isn't found in a shorter trial, but in the absolute promise of deliverance at its conclusion, the first resurrection.
And that leaves us with this final, provocative question, which really gets to the heart of it all. For whom are the days of tribulation truly shortened? The source presents a world divided, with 2 profoundly different experiences at the end of time. One of testing followed by deliverance, and another of rebellion followed by judgment. It's a powerful framework to think about.